Today, we're diving into a massive 9-year saga. We're talking about global corporate giants going head-to-head with a sovereign nation, billions of dollars on the line, and shockwaves that rippled through the entire international investment community. This is the story of India's big and very controversial experiment with retrospective taxation. But let's just boil it all down to one simple question. Imagine you sell something, maybe a car, maybe a house. You follow all the rules, pay all the taxes you owe at the time, and you move on. Then, years later, the government changes the law and sends you a brand new tax bill for that old deal. Sounds pretty wild, right? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
So there's a legal term for this. It's called a retrospective law. Sometimes you'll hear the Latin phrase ex post facto law. It's an incredibly powerful and, pretty controversial tool that lets a government literally reach into the past and change the rules of the game. Okay, let's get into it.
Here's a quick look at where we're headed. We'll start with this idea of a tax from the past. Then we'll get into the landmark legal battles that really defined this whole era. After that, we'll explore why the Indian government did this in the first place and the massive fallout it caused. Then we'll see why the law was eventually scrapped, and finally, what the bigger picture really tells us.
You know, the story of this tax from the past really boils down to two epic corporate showdowns, the sagas of telecom giant Vodafone and the energy firm Cairn. And these weren't just simple court cases. They ballooned into international incidents that seriously tested the limits of a country's power.
What's so fascinating about this timeline is how it lays out this incredible 9-year chess match. You see it all here. It kicks off with a massive deal, a company wins in the highest court in the land, and then, boom, just months later, the government completely flips the board with a new law, and get this, they made it retroactive all the way back to 1962. That one move set the stage for years of brutal international legal fights, and it all ended with a complete U-turn in 2021.
All right, let's rewind to the very beginning. The year is 2007, and the British telecom giant Vodafone makes a huge splash, entering the Indian market by buying up the Indian assets of a company called Hutchison.
And the price tag was a staggering $11 billion. Now here's the clever part, or so they thought. The whole deal was structured offshore. A company in the Cayman Islands was sold by another foreign company. The logic was, hey, since the deal happened outside of India's borders, Indian capital gains tax shouldn't apply, right? This is what experts call an indirect transfer of assets.
And for a while, that logic actually worked. The case wound its way all the way up to India's Supreme Court, and in 2012, the court sided with Vodafone. The reasoning was crystal clear. The thing that was sold, a share in a foreign company, was not technically in India, so India couldn't tax it. It looked like a huge, decisive victory for Vodafone. Or so it seemed.
Just weeks, literally weeks, after losing in its own Supreme Court, the Indian government fired back. Not with a legal appeal, but with a legislative bombshell. They just changed the tax code and made it apply backwards in time, basically erasing the court's decision. And this is where you see the real impact. It was never just about Vodafone. The government could now dig up all sorts of old deals, and it didn't take long for them to turn their sights on another company, Cairn Energy.
It's really helpful to see these two cases side by side. The specifics were a bit different, sure. Vodafone's was that big offshore acquisition we talked about. Cairn's was an even older deal, an internal restructuring they did back in 2006. But the heart of the conflict was exactly the same. In both cases, the government used that new 2012 law to go after old deals. And here's the crucial part. Both companies decided not to fight in Indian courts again. Instead, they took the battle to the international stage, using bilateral investment treaties as their weapon.
So this begs the question, right? Why would India take such a drastic and frankly risky step? Was this a totally necessary move to close tax loopholes? Or did it just end up shattering trust with the rest of the world?
Well, the official line from the Indian government was that this wasn't a new tax at all. No, they argued the change was just clarificatory. Their point was that they were just spelling out what the law was always meant to say, that even if a deal is structured offshore, if the real value is tied to assets in India, that indirect transfer we mentioned, then it should be taxable in India, period.
The immediate reason was obvious. That Supreme Court ruling in the Vodafone case created what the government saw as a massive loophole, one that was costing the country billions in tax revenue. So this legal change was designed to slam that loophole shut and send a clear message. If value comes from India, it gets taxed in India, no matter how creative the accounting is.
But oh, the fallout. It was huge and it was immediate. The global business community was, to put it mildly, alarmed.
The move was quickly labeled tax terrorism. Investors started saying it created this deep uncertainty. I mean, how can you invest in a country if the rules can change retroactively? It damaged India's reputation and kicked off these incredibly expensive international legal battles.
And the numbers, well, they seem to tell a story. Now, of course, lots of things affect investment, but this chart is pretty telling. Look at the dramatic drop in proposed foreign investment in the years right after that 2012 law. It suggests that while the money already in India might have stayed, new investors were definitely getting cold feet. That's a huge chill in confidence.
So, all of this intense backlash, combined with years of fighting in court, eventually led India to do a complete 180, bringing this whole 9-year saga full circle.
The knockout blows didn't come from Indian courts. They came from international arbitration tribunals. And in both the Vodafone and Cairn cases, these tribunals ruled that India's tax demand violated something called the Fair and Equitable Treatment Standard. Now, that's a key idea in international law. It's basically a promise that countries make in treaties to give foreign investors a stable, predictable playing field, and the tribunal said India had broken its promise.
And the financial penalty was enormous. In the Cairn case alone, the tribunal ordered India to pay $1.2 billion in damages, plus interest and costs. So now, India wasn't just dealing with a PR nightmare. It was facing huge financial penalties and even the threat of having its assets overseas, like Air India planes, seized to pay the bill.
Faced with all this mounting pressure, the Indian government finally waved the white flag. In August 2021, it introduced a new bill to kill the 2012 Retrospective Tax Amendment once and for all.
So here's the deal they offered. First, they'd withdraw every single tax demand made under that law. Second, the companies had to drop all of their lawsuits and any claims for damages. Third, the government would refund any tax money it had already collected. But, and this is a big but, fourth, it would not be paying any interest on that refunded money. It was basically a deal to wipe the slate clean and just move on.
So why the sudden change of heart after all those years? Well, the government's own statement made it pretty clear. In a world trying to recover from the COVID pandemic, India knew it needed to attract foreign investment to boost its economy. They pretty much admitted that the retrospective tax was a sore point for investors and that it was finally time to provide some tax certainty.
So after almost a decade of fighting, what can we take away from this whole episode? One publication called it India's 9-year misadventure, which seems about right.
This quote from the Intertax Journal really just nails it, doesn't it? It says that while a country absolutely has the right to tax, if you use that power in a way that feels unpredictable or unfair, it can seriously backfire. It can end up hurting the state itself by scaring away the very investment you're trying to attract in the first place.
And that really leaves us with the huge question at the heart of this entire saga. How does a country balance its right to make its own laws and collect its own taxes with the promises it makes to protect investors and provide a stable environment for business? This whole story shows us just how incredibly difficult and how critically important it is to find that line.